Have I told y'all this? This is just a collection of stories that I wrote of different things that happened in mine and my husband's life. My husband is Dennis Mitchell, and I'm Nelda. We live on a farm out from Collins, Mississippi. And if you want these books, they make wonderful gifts for people that you don't know what in the heck to buy for them. They make a good gift to give to them. And I'm proud that you're listening to this. Right now I'm going to read you about walking home from Salem Church on a freezing cold November night. Now this is a picture of Salem Baptist Church. It was a Southern Baptist church out in the country from Collins. That's where I went until I got married. This church was built in the 1800s and then added on through the years to the auditorium would seat 500 people. And then in 1956, it was torn down to make room for a new church. But that's where I went until I got married in 1955. And this story starts with it being so cold. And the moonlight was so bright and the colors could be identified. Stars twinkled. My brother Joe said it was the Milky Way that we saw. Ice had spewed up in the gravel road. It broke and crunched under our feet. Our breath formed white clouds as we trudged towards home. The old car had put us down. We'd pushed it as fast as we could run down the big hill from Salem Church all the way down to the Rogers Creek Bridge. Pushing with the front door open with one hand guiding the steering wheel, Joe had jumped in several times to crank it. Vivian Eve, Jane, and I were in our usual spots on the back bumper. Vivian Eve on the right, Jane on the left, and I in the middle. We kept it moving even when he made it jerk when he jumped in to try to crank it. It did not even fire or cough or sputter. It was dead. It would not crank. We would have to walk the 5 miles home. We had on lots of wool clothes, and pushing the car had warmed our inside, so here we went. It was the fourth Monday night in November 1947. We had joined other church members at Salem Church and rode Mr. Dewey Valentine's school bus to Lebanon Church for the training union's M night. M stood for motivation, trying to motivate all the young people. It had been at least 15 Arctic miles to Lebanon in that well-ventilated bus. Our hearts were warmed as we sat in the unheated church because we won the banner for having the most in attendance. It was for young people and their leaders. It was about 9:30 p.m. when we returned to Salem Church. Everyone else had parked on the front. They cranked up and left, and before we even had time to walk around to the back, those that had come in cars, a lot of them Mr. Valentine had picked up on his bus on his way to the church. Joe had parked the car pointed toward the road, not too far back and not too close to the brink of the hill on the back of the church, so we could push down the hill. He didn't want the car to start rolling by itself and didn't want to have to push over too much level ground. We knew we'd have to push. We'd pushed it at least twice a day for several winters, going to school in it every day, so we could stay at home an extra hour each morning and return an hour early in the afternoons than when we rode the school bus. That gave us time to help milk the cows, slop the hogs, feed the chickens, and do seasonal chores. At school, Joe would park the car on the far side of Marvin Deese's store so it could be headed toward home. It was a 1937 Chevrolet. Daddy had bought it used, and we'd had it several years. It was the ugliest car ever manufactured. It was black with a flat trunk. It had 4 doors. The back doors opened at the center post, and straps hung above each door so passengers could pull themselves out of the car or hold on to it so they didn't flop around as the car bounced over rough roads. Back vent windows pushed out, so the open part was toward the back. Front vent windows were the opposite. It had cloth seats and wide armrests. Mother said it was a fine car, but it never cranked without being pushed, it seemed like. Well, maybe a few times it did. This night, Joe had beat on the battery cables. He had spit on the spark plugs. And he was so frustrated. Stranded in the swamp with 3 little sisters. He said that he was going to get Daddy to buy us a flashlight so he could see how to work on that car in that dark swamp. Joe made me ride piggyback on his back, and I told him I wasn't scared. He was twice my age, but my skinny 8-year-old body could get heavy quickly. He let me walk when we started uphill out of the swamp. About a mile further, we approached the first house, Mr. Harold Bryant's. Barking dogs ran out from under it. We worried that Mr. Bryant might come out and see what was causing the dogs to bark. Joe said he probably wouldn't get out because the smoke was not coming from their chimney, indicating that their fire had died down, and it would be too cold for him to get out of his warm bed. But just in case, we walked faster. It would be embarrassing for the Bryant children to tell at school the next day that we had been out in the middle of the night walking because we had such an awful old car. Joe said that he doubted that their car would crank on such a cold winter night anyway because they hadn't even gone to the M night. Jane's best friend, Mary Alice McGee, lived in the next house. Her father, Mr. Floyd, was famous in our world for being an excellent automobile mechanic. Well, we decided that we would not ask him to come out and fix our car because we wouldn't have any way to pay him if he did. Well, we had enough of Daddy in us to adhere to Daddy's philosophy of never asking for help unless one is desperate and couldn't do a thing for himself. Joe said he'd stay out of school the next day and try to fix the old car when it was warmer. Maybe it was just cold. And on we walked. By the time we got to Mr. Alfred Grantham's, Joe said that we should stop and ask him to carry us home. We girls told him we could make it, but he said no, the sensible thing to do was to ask for help, and that Mr. Grantham had a good car and would help us. And Joe was always sensible and knew what to do. The Granthams had no children who would ridicule us at school, and it was freezing cold, so we consented to stop. Joe walked across their front porch, beat on the door, and hollered several times, "This is Joe Spell! We need some help, Mr. Grantham!" After some movement in the house, a light came on. Several minutes later, Mr. Alfred opened the door. Miss Claudia was up too. Both had put on clothes. He had on overalls over a long john suit, and she had a dress over a longer gown. Both were barefoot. This front room was their bedroom. They fretted as they tried to rush us inside where it was warm. Well, it seemed colder inside than out. There was no fire in their fireplace. Mr. Alfred lit a small lighter knot in the fireplace and told us to stand back so we wouldn't scorch. I thought, oh my goodness. I thought we could have walked on a mile before while he scrambled for his shirt, socks, shoes, coat, hat, and we could have walked another mile while he searched for his car keys and unlocked his garage and cranked up his car. He made us wait on the porch until he had the car backed out into the road. It was a nice, new, plush car. He chuckled a lot. He seemed sort of kind that night. I'd always thought he was a grouch, but he really wasn't. When we got home, Mother, Daddy, and baby Eloise were sound asleep. They didn't even know we were late. Our oldest sister, Olene, was over at Jones Junior College. The next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I was bundled up again in wool clothes and to walk the quarter of a mile down the frozen road to tell the bus driver, Dub Dickens, that we needed to ride his school bus to school that day. Well, I got there, and he was out on his back porch shaving and only had on a t-shirt.